Denzel Washington. He has brought us over 40 years of seemingly effortless performances with messages the entertainment industry and the world would not be the same without. And though his array of projects show the brilliance of those whose works he helped to bring to life, it would appear that there is a story the actor is trying to bring to life himself through the roles he has chosen to play. And now, A Film Life takes a look at the life created by Denzel Washington through film, the life of one Roger Porter. Born on screen to us in Brooklyn in 1969 as a 6-year-old trumpet player in training by the name of Bleak Gillum, this young man had a sense of being an everyday Joe, but the talent that was beyond compare. And this bright young man would find a most fascinating film life awaiting him. There was something different about him. If he didn't know it, the community around him would certainly make it clear. The first domino fell when he discovered that the people he thought were his parents actually were not. His real parents were in Chicago, and so young Bleak's journey would begin in the Windy City. After finding his mom in Chicago, he discovered that his name at birth was Roger Porter. 11 years later, a 17-year-old appears at the doorstep of a wealthy Jewish man who changed his name in order to better fit in with the white business culture in San Marino, California. And the man now known as Walter Whitney,
"Hi, Daddy,"
is his biological father. Walter and Roger's mom were in love in Chicago, and they were ready to wed, but the call of high society got the best of the career-climbing Whitney, and he abandoned Roger's mom. After her passing, Roger decided to drive out west to see about this man who turned away his mother. Walter accepts the news as best he could. He would see that Roger was a chip off the old block. They were both highly intelligent, both had a thing for name changes.
"How come you changed your last name?"
None of your business, Roger.
Well, being that your name is my name, too, I just wanted to know what I should call myself.
Whatever makes you happy.
Roger Whitney. Yeah, that's style. Sounds like I belong. Roger Weisenthal. Nah, don't feel right. I could just see everybody saying, "You don't look like no Weisenthal."
And Roger was attending Northwestern.
It's where I went.
He's in his second year of pre-med.
Walter would grow to accept Roger. Unfortunately, that acceptance came at an extreme price. He lost everything dear to him, even his family. Realizing a second chance at fatherhood, Walter joins his 17-year-old prodigy, and they head back to Chicago to start brand new. The outcome played out better than Roger could have imagined. He gained a father and an ally for the road ahead, and he got exposure into the way the upper class thinks and operates. These would be seeds that fueled Roger in his quest to find his identity in the world. Boston, Massachusetts would be the location of Roger's next stop. This time at a rundown teaching hospital. Roger may have chosen the hospital because of the need for top-notch physicians in this urban community, but his choice may have also held some sentimental value, as he had a relative that fought in the 54th in the Civil War. Roger was fresh out of med school and raring to go, and having his dad flip the bill for schooling didn't hurt.
I know it's rough, Chandler, when your old man puts you through.
Not really.
In Boston, he would become Dr. Philip Chandler. And the Chandler name? Perhaps it was his way of paying homage to a certain part of town where he and his father became close. Porter would excel in Boston, but the good doctor wrestled with the truth of this path, and in the end felt it more his father's dream than his own, and ultimately decided to quit the profession and follow love all the way to Mississippi with his longtime girlfriend. Unfortunately, the happily ever after ending missed the couple. After the breakup, Roger decided to stay down south and start fresh. He took a gamble on himself and started his own business as a carpet cleaner. One day, a chance encounter with a young woman would change his course. Once again, Porter and the young woman would fall in love, and yet another battle would begin, and though he was able to gain acceptance from her family, the pair struggled to make the relationship work. And in the end, Roger found himself alone once more. He had had enough of trying to find love in people. It was time to put his energy into what he felt loved him first, the trumpet. Porter would return to Brooklyn, the last place he felt right, to chase that trumpet dream. Coming home to his old stomping grounds, of course, meant that he had to resurrect the Bleak Gillum name. This endeavor proved painful.
He's a horrible manager. Everybody can see that but you.
The midget should go.
So with childhood dreams and marital bliss in the lost column, Porter turned to the beast of burden, power. And what better place than the power hub of the world, politics. Under the name Arnold Billings, Porter ran a public relations firm and he did so virtually undetected.
Ralph, I need some help on this Billings guy. I don't know why it's this tough. How many top black lobbyists can there be in Washington?
His close-to-the-vest rise powered him to the Ohio Senate race, where he served a little-known but wealthy candidate with his public relations acumen. And he did so with ruthless aggression. Unfortunately, that aggression wouldn't be enough, and in the high-stakes political game, failure is not an option. Porter would be forced to close down his firm, but he was hungry for that power. Roger had a couple of dreams that made his next move clear. He had to get into law. Los Angeles would be the setting for the return of Roger, who was last there to discover his biological father. Things worked out pretty well back then, and the trend continued, at least for the beginning. He found out he had family who lived in LA, which he didn't know about during his first visit. He had a great uncle who came to town in the 40s after World War II, and though he was no longer around, he made sure that everyone in his family knew that his house, a house he loved so much, would have to stay in his family. So Roger had a starting point, and with his military background, which hadn't been of much use, along with his real-world savvy, he became a golden boy, and all eyes were on him. And when he was aided by an amateur videographer, as he took down a hitman as a rookie, this hero went straight to the top with a bullet. He became ADA in only 8 years, and could do no wrong. But the hitman whose bust propelled him had a passion of his own to take down this hero and watch him suffer. Things went haywire for Porter during this battle, and though he prevailed the test, the events left him without words. Feeling the need to get away, leaving the country was on his mind. He thought about heading to England to visit a relative there, but decided to take some time in the Caribbean, where he spent some time as a child. It wouldn't be long before Porter would be back at it again, serving as police chief for this small island. But even in the Caribbean, extreme trouble would find him. Events involving a childhood friend would cause him to rethink his course and head back to the States to try law one more time. And with a new start came a new city. In Philadelphia, he would get footing as a personal injury lawyer, hitting moderate success until one day a groundbreaking opportunity presented itself, and Porter found himself squarely in the midst of a historical case. The result went in his favor, but more importantly, his life was changed as his boundaries expanded. Unfortunately, his client would not live long after the trial, but that young man's contribution to Porter's life will bring a glimmer of much-needed light for the road ahead. After the case, Porter was zealous to spread the message of his good friend and bring awareness to his cause. A family member who was a reporter for the Washington Herald was raring to go with the story of what happened in Philadelphia. But time would not allow for this, as the reporter had a much bigger story brewing for him. And for Roger, he had a dutiful call from his uncle. Porter's military time would come back around, and though he began in the Marines,
Did 3 years in the U.S. Marines. Not in Quantico.
he transferred to a more fulfilling opportunity with the Navy. When the captain of the USS Alabama needed some fresh blood for an upcoming mission, Roger would be the man for the job. And what he lacked in combat experience, he more than made up for in critical thinking, as his actions may have prevented a world war. Things did not go smoothly on the underwater voyage. After a huge disagreement with the captain, Roger found himself arrested on board the vessel and charged with mutiny. Facing crisis yet again, this time for what may have had implications that would affect the entire free world, he would start feeling the pressure. And after dreams of him fighting virtual villains and being an angel, Porter realized he had one mission: get off this sub and carry on with life on the ground. The hair-raising adventure would not be the last for him with Uncle Sam. The details of what transpired on the USS Alabama would take some time to finalize, so he was given a lighter task, utilizing his medical background to help counsel a young man who was having a hard time in the Navy. This was perfect for Roger since he was still desiring to help after his time in Philadelphia. The time he spent with this young man was very beneficial, and he wanted to do so much more, but that moment would have to hold him. For the war he thought he prevented turned out only to be a delay of the inevitable. The Gulf War became a priority for the nation, and Roger's ordeal with the Navy sub cleared just in time as he wanted in. Little did he know, the events in that war would set him on a course that would shift his paradigm in a way that he would not recover from. After transferring to his third branch of service, the Army, he would get right into combat. During a nighttime battle, Roger, in the midst of confusion, destroys one of his own tanks, which took the life of a friend. The Army would see to it that that story would not get out. But before that, the distraught Porter would have to soldier on because the war was still at hand, and his leadership was still at a premium. Unfortunately, he would find himself involved in yet another situation with a soldier who was the son of a U.S. senator who would go on to be a Medal of Honor awardee for his bravery. Once back home, Porter's police skills would surface as he was assigned a special inquiry task for another possible Medal of Honor awardee. Needless to say, the mission was not without its share of twists and turns, and once the inquiry was over, he did a little soul-searching of his own. He would come clean to the family of his fallen comrade, and Porter would begin to tackle yet another truth, one that was buried deep within him and desperate to get out. But to unlock this truth, Porter would have to engage in his biggest battle yet. The political beast was one Porter had trouble slaying years before, but the time was now for him to face a challenge from the monster yet again. This time not as one looking to attain a share of the power, but as one looking to strip away some of it for the sake of his sanity. Things with Porter were not right after the war, and it would only get worse as he would have troubling dreams. Dreams about attacks on the country, dreams about going back in time to stop crime, even bizarre dreams about him being a pilot and saving the passengers of a flight by flying upside down. But the dream that haunted him most was a reoccurring dream about what happened regarding that first Medal of Honor awardee.
We've been down this road with you before, yes?
No, sir. Not this road.
This saga would end with implants,
Somebody put an implant inside me. I got a good feeling they put one in you too.
memory hacking, murder, and the tearing down of a conspiracy that could have changed the face of politics. Porter would slay his dragon, but the results would see him sworn off military life for good. Porter was at his rawest point of his entire life. For the first time, he found himself unsure about who he was or what he was supposed to be doing. He was in search of direction. Looking to take some time off seemed like the best option. He thought about Mexico, but two relatives left bad reputations that soiled the ground for him. He thought about Louisiana. His cousin, who worked for the Herald, told him wonderful things about the New Orleans life. Once again, an ancestor's past would muddy the waters.
I didn't kill much. Some things need getting rid of.
Roger reached out to a family member, a cousin who lived in Pennsylvania in a town just outside of Pittsburgh. They had a great time reliving the exploits of a great uncle in particular. The stories brought a spark of life back to Roger, and when his cousin told him about working with trains, Roger felt this was the opportunity he needed to get back on track. His cousin was able to get Roger a job in New York as a train dispatcher. He told him it would be the easiest work he could do with his skill set. And that would be true, and then one day, it wasn't. The mild blue-collar position turned into a terrorist hijacking ransom event that would bring the mighty transit system to its knees. Not exactly what Roger was looking for, but he handled the crisis with the same confidence and intelligence that had gotten him this far. Roger Porter was officially back. With his mojo on full, Roger wanted to get back into the swing with his police work again, and an opportunity presented itself when he persuaded the powers that be to let a family member in prison talk to a son who was a top-flight basketball recruit and try to convince him to sign with Big State in New York. Things worked out well, although not for the relative, and Porter was granted a high position in the New York Police Department Crime Division. But for some reason, Roger felt called to return to the city of brotherly love. After a few phone calls, Roger was back in Philadelphia, this time to protect and serve, starting in his own home. Roger never could shake the desire to do some good. It began in Philadelphia, and he saw fit to see it continue there. He opened himself up to a program for people with intellectual disabilities and served as a big brother to a young man and his son. Things were going as well as he could have hoped, and the stay continued for some time. But as the story of his life goes, the challenge that brought him to town would rear its ugly head. Porter had his share of collars with grudges. The events from his time as ADA out west would ricochet in his mind for the rest of his life. Roger couldn't have imagined that a trip to see an inmate set to face execution would result in him running from an evil spirit hell-bent on tormenting him for as long as humanly possible. Roger had the inevitable task of outsmarting a dark force, and he did not back down. This challenge would take him to his death, rather the brink of it. Using his medical background, Roger was able to take a drug that would poison him and stop his heart long enough to fool the evil spirit into thinking he was no more.
I said I was going to tell you about the time I almost died.
The result of that spiritual encounter had a great effect on his outlook He knew now for certain that we are not alone in this world, and that if there were forces for evil, there had to be forces for good. The mountains that were moved through the spiritual warfare would create rippling waves in Roger's life, but those waves would not soon be realized, as he would face some trying times in his personal life. And for a man driven by intelligence and problem solving, there is no joy in matters he could not solve. Roger would lose a loved one, a particularly troubled family member who Roger had to talk off the ledge many a time. This loved one had gotten himself involved in some waters too deep for him to swim out of on this occasion.
King Kong ain't got...
He would also have another loss, a mentor of sorts, as a famed detective turned author would succumb to injuries that left him in a paraplegic state. He and Porter had talked on many occasions about police work, and Roger admired and saw a lot of himself in him. What moved Roger the most was the fortitude to push past the adversity and continue to use his gifts for good. Finally, there was an incident involving a mild-mannered cousin who was arrested for holding a hospital hostage back in Chicago. This hit Roger very hard because it involved his cousin's young child, who needed a heart transplant. Roger saw the level of dedication this father had for his son, and it moved him. He found himself thinking if there was anything he was willing to give his life for in this world. Roger found himself in yet another strange place in life. He wanted something that he could not find, and albeit at the top of his career, he was now at a helpless place with this void. Roger stayed the police course and headed down to Florida to give the South yet another try. He found love for a little bit, but as it goes with a complicated soul, it did not last. Policing did, however, and he became the chief of police for a small town called Banyan Key. His emotions were not in check. He became involved with another man's wife. In his mind, he was helping the woman as she was being beaten by the spouse. Personality conflicts hampered his judgment, and he was unable to see clearly what was before him. When the young wife presented a problem to Roger, he could only think about pain. Her pain, about the pain of the relatives that he felt he let down when he was unable to aid them. He was at a place where the words "never again" had entered his psyche. With his guard down and his mind aflutter, Roger did something that was very uncharacteristic, which proved to be disastrous. But it did kick him back in gear, and he was able to salvage the mess he made, but only by the skin of his teeth. He had escaped this time, but seeds had been sown, and Roger could feel the shift occurring in his life. He knew he had to make the best of what might be his last run. He headed back to New York to take a detective position, but scandal engulfed him once more. For the first time ever, Roger found himself bested by an opponent. This stung his ego, and though he was able to shine a light on what would turn out to be a bigger issue and have his name cleared in the scandal that haunted his promotion, the thought of losing to a bank robber who told Roger exactly what he was going to do was unshakable. Add to that the death of a beloved uncle, one that inspired him to practice law, and Roger had fallen into a dark place, one that would scar him for his remaining days. It would be years before anyone would see or hear from Roger again. Then one day, in South Africa, a man walks up to the gate of the U.S. Embassy and tells the man on guard that he is a man by the name of Tobin Frost. Tobin Frost, 8 years prior, was Roger Porter. Roger, wanting to get away from everything, headed to the CIA. It was here that Roger could have the anonymity he always desired. But with that level of freedom, there is a need for strong discipline, and he had demons he had not yet dealt with. His willingness to play fast and loose with the law, his unsettling nature, even the issue with implants resurfaced. The CIA turned out to be the worst move for him, as he went rogue and got involved in several nefarious deals, which now made him a target rather than an asset to the organization. And though his work turned out to be his effort to unmask the darkness that powered the CIA, his means would bring out a world of hurt, which ultimately would bring him to death's door once again. In exchange for his freedom, he would be retired from the CIA, but because of the threats on his life, he would arrange to have his death faked. Thanks to his medical training and the events that transpired his second time in Philadelphia, he made it go off without a hitch.
You had a nice funeral, in case you were wondering. Anyone could have figured a way out, a way to walk away from it all. For good, you know. Like a real fresh start. It would have been you.
Roger would return home, done with ambition, done with meddling, done with the chase. He was older now, and only wanted to live out his days quietly in Boston. He found love again, and this time it was till death did them part. He was now just another man, and quite content being so. until he developed an inability to sleep. Rather than staying at home, his extroverted ways would show forth, which led him to an encounter with a young woman who would end up being in a hospital after an attack. Too many years of service would not allow Roger to rest on this, but wanting to keep a promise as best he could, he turned to a vigilante lifestyle. This would be his life until his final act, traveling across the post-apocalyptic America to deliver an important book to people who would need it to rebuild. This undoubtedly would be the most difficult endeavor he would ever undertake. In a place of complete isolation and loneliness, he is now living the life he feared he would face, that he tried to avoid all his days. He wanted nothing more than to leave this cruel world, but he remembered Lincoln Rhymes and his fight. He remembered his father, who went to jail to protect his son he barely knew. He remembered his cousin, who was willing to give his life for his son to have a chance in this world. He remembered his ancestors and how they endured in times of despair. The waves would come crashing in, and the seeds that were sown many years ago in his life-altering spiritual warfare were producing a harvest like none other in his life. Roger knew he was still meant for this world, if but for one last ride.
Got so caught up with keeping it safe, I forgot to live by what I learned from it.
Yeah, what's that?
Do for others more than you do for yourself. That's what I got from it anyway.
And it was here that Roger Porter, upon completion of his task, would reach the final page of his script, and thus the storied life and times of an amazing individual whose contributions to humanity will not soon be forgotten has its end. Denzel Washington's Roger Porter, a complicated man
Gotta be who you are in this world, right? No matter what.
who conveyed life lessons as best he could through this film life.